Looking fantastic. I'm going to start recording here now. I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to mute and turn off my video so that everybody can concentrate on our on your presentation. And then Jason and I will be monitoring the chat room. And so if any questions come up, we'll get them at the end. But you, sir, are in control. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us on. I'd like to talk to everybody about compound buff and polish, right? And share some tips that I've learned in actually the last few years. Give you a little background on myself. I've been in the industry for 27 years. 23 of the 27 I've been professionally training. In the last 5.5 years, I've worked for Saint-Gobain Norton. And not only am I a trainer, but I'm also involved in the R&D portion of our business. And 2 years ago, I was asked to work on a polishing project. And I'm like, okay, I'm pretty familiar with this. I've been around it. You know what? I didn't know anything. I learned so much from visiting different shops in my region and across the country. I just, it was a really cool experience. And I'd like to share some things I learned. I want to talk about the buff and polish process and some seven tips that we learned. This was a huge one. Keeping the pads clean. You want to store it. You want to store your pads in a clean place, right? So if there's dirt on the pad, that's going to be a problem, right? Because you've done tremendous work, great welds, great seam sealer, panels are aligned right, they're refinished correctly, and then the last step, right, which is polishing, we scrape the heck out of it and it looks horrible and the customer's going to want to kill you. So when you do clean them, right, you want to make sure they're completely dry before storing them. So many places that I went to, they get rinsed and they get flopped in the cabinet. There's rust on them. It's bad. Use high pressure. Don't use high pressure compressed air on the foam pads. That actually can rip chunks of foam right out of it, and that's going to shorten the pad's life. Speaking of the pad's life, you want to make sure that you have a change out for your pads. And what I mean by that is, you can't be using a wool pad that's, right on the backing plate, right? That's not going to work out easy either. You've been using it for a year, and that's not going to work out. You want to make sure you stay with a fresh pad that's doing its job, that's clean, and the reason we don't want to have swirl marks. We want to spur the wool pads as an option. You do not want to spur wool because, of course, it will rip chunks out of it. You can use those cool conditioning brushes. They're like oversized toothbrushes, right? Go along the foam pad and get all the dried up compound and what have you on there. Make sure that when you do start with a new pad, it's dry because you've cleaned it. So you want to make sure that you have enough compound on there to start things going. Tip 2, low RPM. All right, many of the places that we visited, the polisher is spinning at above 2,000 RPMs. You can see it. You go and verify it. When you're compounding, 1,400 to 2,000 RPM is a good place to be there. Gives you some, if you're a little faster moving polisher, yeah, you can head up to 1,800 to 2,000, right? I have to use my hands. I can't talk without my hands. Maintain, when you're at the finishing compound, you want to actually lower it, 900 to 1,500 RPM, all right? And there's a reason for this. We want to keep the surface cool. And this is something, we're coming into the warmer months, cars outside. and you know, can be up to 160, 170 degrees, and we bring it into polish because we want to deliver it, and the compound is, you know, smearing on the car, potential burning the paint. You got to get it cooled down, and that's the best way to go with it. When you're polishing, you don't want to overheat it. Foam will create more heat than wool. Okay. Being aware of that, so you want to make sure you stay under 120 degrees. And how you know that is most shops have a infrared temperature gauge. You hit the panel, make sure you're keeping it under 120 degrees. You don't want it any hotter than that. So be aware of that if you do bring it inside, also that it's cooled back down, all right? Or you will not have success. Right. Tip 4, we want to work small areas. There's a couple reasons for this, all right? Sometimes, you know, we're working a hood, you know, we're you know, the whole thing is sanded down, and we want to make sure that we work a 2 foot by 2 foot area just to keep ourselves kind of organized. And before we move on to the next section, we evaluate, hey, this is compounded enough or this is polished enough. We've achieved this because it's the worst to finish this process, clean it all up, get it all pretty, put it outside and go, oh, man, I got to bring it back in.
Hey, Dennis,
Yes.
there's a request, and I always hate to interrupt, but it's a timely request to go back and see the RPM range slide again.
Please. Yep.
Awesome. So if there's the slide, right? So we've got that up there, 1,400 to 2,000, 900 to 1,500. Was there a specific question that he can address while he's here on the slide, or was it just to see the slide? I'm going to hold on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think we're good. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I'll hit it again. It's designed to keep the temperature down and make the compound work. That's why it's in that range. That's what the design is. All right. We want to use a dime size amount of compound. Holy mackerel. In our travels, we see so much overuse of the material, and I'm laughing because we all know what happens when we have too much. You know, we got the buffer right here. We go ahead and sling it all over the place, onto the technician, onto the car, on the wall. We want to keep it small, all right? But we want to have enough to do its job, right? So spread the compound so it doesn't sling. Keep the surface wet with compound or polish. I like to keep a handy detailer spray with me. I keep it, you know, in my little buff apron, right? Just to keep it, especially when it gets warmer. I like to have that. That helps out. And it's easier when you do that. Again, when you work small areas, you can identify if you've removed all the sand scratches out. Buffing technique. So you want to keep the pad flat on the surface. All right. You want to keep it you want to keep it work it from right to left. All right, right to left. 50% overlap of the pad. So if you have an 8-inch pad, you start off with 4 inches off the panel, as long as it's not touching anything else. And then you work off, buffing off the panel, right? And then work, when you make that one pass, move down 4 inches, and then 4 inches, and away you go. A nice rhythm, you know, I call it dancing with the polisher, right? Because you can't be stiff. You kind of have to flow with it, right? No, I'm not going to start breaking it down here. Let the tool do the work. Holy mackerel. When I do, in my training center in Waterville, New York, which is near Albany, New York, we get to see different folks that polish. And a lot of times I'm asking the students to get the death grip off of the polisher. It looks like this. You don't have to do that. The polisher will do the work. In fact, with my left hand that guides the handle, as you can see there in the slide, I actually do it with one finger. There's no reason to muscle the polisher and which will create more heat when you're putting down the weight and trying to muscle it. A lot of cases, what you need to do is potentially maybe stop with the compounding process, maybe resand. There may be a missed spot there, and then go back and polish. Okay, but you definitely want to make sure you let the tool do the work. You know, and minimizing heat build up. All right. Make sure and another actually that last one. Make sure the pad is centered on the backing plate. That is the worst thing in the world. When it's not, it's going to shake your fillings out of your mouth. Number 7. Choose the right system. This was huge. So we would find there would be multiple systems in the shop, right? So doesn't matter the organization, and then you have the polisher using, oh, I like this brand for compounding, and I like another brand for this. All these products are designed for a standard operating procedure and to stay in the system, right? That works for you, right? So we want to make sure when we sand, all right, that we have the right grits. So a lot of folks start with dirt removal with 1500 grit, with P1500 grit, and sometimes P1500 isn't enough. It's not enough to take the defect out. In some cases, you may have to start with 1200 or 1000 grit, move up to 1500, then to 2000 grit. All right. The finer the grit that you use, the easier you can bring up that gloss. All right. I like to have this in my head. You know, coarser the paper, flatter the job. Okay. The flatter you get it, the better off that's going to be removed. If you start with too fine a grit, it's gonna go over top of that defect. You're going to get it outside. It's not going to look well. All right. So we want to make sure that we sand it. Now, when we do sand, we have to keep in mind all the paint manufacturers' film thickness guidelines, which is anywhere from 2 to 2.5 mils of clear coat. So we want to make sure that we don't remove more than we have to. A good idea is to utilize a mill gauge prior and then after the polishing process, so you'll know exactly where you're at. Okay. Dark versus light colors. In the G360 system, you can actually do with light colors with the compounding, two pads, be it a wool or a white foam, and then follow it with a black pad and be done with it. With light colors, it's going to be a 3-step process. So it's going to be wool, black, and then the blue pad with the polish product. And the reason for that is you can see more scratches with a darker color. So you just want to make sure you remove that. I get asked this one all the time. What do you like, wool or foam? It depends. It really is, hey, what do you like? Are you sanding to 1500? If that's the case, I'm going to start with wool, and it can do it just fine. If I'm going to sand to 2000 grit, I can do either one. I can do a white foam, or I can go ahead with the wool. because that scratch is finer, I can get right out of it. So the answer to the question, what do you like? You know, you like, some people like Fords, Chevys, Toyotas, what have you. It's what you're into, you know. What works for the technician. The other thing too is with a wool pad, wool has wool on it. So if you spur it, some of the wool fibers can come off, and if you're near the paint facility, that could potentially get into the paint shop or on the painter, and then be brought into the booth, and that wouldn't be good. I would have the polishing kind of removed from the paint shop, just to make sure that none of the fibers from the wool, and let's say you're just using foam, even the compound dust getting in there, you know. That's just my opinion. We had 2 different sizes of pads, and there's a reason for that. The pad size, you know, if I only have a couple defects in the job, I'm going to grab 3-inch paper, be it 1200, 1500, or even 2000 grit, remove that defect and take it out with a small pad. You know, I don't want to over process that car. And that's just something that we noticed in our travels, is the use of more and more of 3-inch, just trying to utilize, you know, trying to get the car out as quickly as possible, right? You know, if it's only a small little repair, we don't need to put an 8-inch pad on it. We can go ahead and use a 3-inch. Okay. Questions on that?
Sorry, I was trying to get myself unmuted there, Dennis.
That's all right.
So a couple of questions to go through. Pull over here and take. So there's wool and there's foam, and then there's double-sided, right? So
Yes.
Single-sided, double-sided pads. What's your thoughts there, bud?
So, I mean, if I had a bigger job, I would have a double-sided pad, because if it gets saturated, right, I can just flip it around and then keep going. They're both great pads. If I have a small job, I don't think I'm going to have the double-sided. But if I have a bigger job, you know, 3/4 nose, you know, that needs to be, you know, I would have a double-sided pad, so I can just flip it and keep going, especially if I saturate a pad.
All right. So another question that's come up here lately. Oh, I'm sorry, Jason.
I was just going to ask Dennis, you know, any thoughts on the difference between an electric and a battery powered tools?
So, personal opinion, I like the battery powered tools. There's, you know, in my training center, you know, in our training center, that's what we have. We do have electrics for testing purposes, but I like the battery powered deals. You know, they get me about 35 minutes of work time. That's perfect. I got a backup battery, and I'm good to go. I do like them because I don't have to roll up the cord.
Yeah, I think I keep both in the shop, and periodically when we're shooting training videos, no one wants me to use the battery powered, but I love them because I don't. Cord management is the same as when I'm painting hose management, right? I keep driven into my head. I still hear John Kosmowski yelling at me, telling me that first 6 feet of hose is my lifeline or whatever, you know? So you get out and get the buffing and polishing and trying to keep that cord off the panel, and, you know, not put more damage in the panel because you're rubbing it than other. I love the battery powered. So,
right.
So when you use them, you're not having any trouble maintaining RPMs or the high level of RPMs that you're needing?
No, not anything. That's what we tested with our test for the last 2 years.
Awesome.
We got a couple more questions coming too. Recommended amount of polish be the same orbital type polisher like a Rupees?
Yeah, I do have some experience with these compounds with that. I mean, use the same amount. As long as that pad isn't dry, you're fine. I assume it's dry when you first start, so you're going to add just a tip more, and then go to work. That's a good question.
Yeah. You talked about, you use the detailer spray, basically. What you had there, like, was it liquid ice or the ice
Yeah,
product?
liquid ice. Yeah, this is my home version.
So a lot of times when I'm bringing out a fresh pad, the three little dots in a polisher's mind doesn't feel like it wets up that pad very much. And so dry is bad in general. Dry is bad on the pad. Dry is bad if your panel gets dry too. Is there any, do you pre-spray your pad before you do your three little drops? Because I mean, when you guys sent me this product, I was like, 2 little dimes, whatever. So it was, you're lying to me, guys. But I mean, is that a possibility? Because I know that was my mental. Just, I'm like, this isn't enough. I'm not going to wet up the pad. That just really made me freeze.
I like to put a spritz on there.
Okay.
But you don't have to. Most don't that are out there, but I like to keep it. I'd like to verify that it's wet, not dry, especially when we get into the warmer months, and it's going to be drying quickly.
Yeah.
Especially if we can bring a car in, right? That's 110 degrees. I'm definitely gonna have that.
Okay. So rotary versus dual action.
Well, I love them both, and I'm not trying to be Switzerland.
You're like Switzerland. That's what I know. You took my line, man.
Oh my gosh, no, it's not. I mean, we have both, right? And the rotary, or excuse me, the orbital doesn't cut as quickly, right? Okay. It just doesn't. If you want to finish with it, then it does do a good job. But the cut is always the challenge.
Yeah. And I think that the next question that came in from Brad, I think that answers it, because he was basically as an orbital buffer a little slower, which you brought out there. And I find most of my I don't know, most of my custom car builders, when they're prepping or they're getting a car ready for like the SEMA show or for the Amber or whatever, they're big into those orbitals. That's their favorite, and that makes it a little slow, but they got the time. I mean, they're going to spend 12 days polishing that car.
Well, just to add to this, we had applied so much science to this whole process. We were, weighing the amount of compounds, doing gloss readings. I mean, there is a ton of work to make sure and validate what I'm actually saying is accurate. So, that's where I learned a ton about this stuff. And so I know when I say it's faster, it's definitely faster.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Jason, you seen any other questions out there?
Yeah, just about orbital buffers slower to complete the process overall. But.
Yeah, so it's definitely paint finishing is one of those things where we need to do it quickly and effectively. We need to do it with as little material as possible, because everything comes down to cost. And then we need to do it without putting more damage in, whether that's the sandpaper you select or the compounding and buffing system that you select. So I always tell shops, kind of what you did, Dennis, you choose the right tool for whatever you have. And I don't say that I never, I personally tried to get away from wool because it does make a mess. But occasionally I'll get an older car in here and I'm like, bring out the wool. Right. We're going to have to take a deep cut on this one before we get started. So, choosing the right tool for the right job in front of you. And it's just like with body repair. It's never the same thing. It's always, it's I wish it was, but everything's always different. So empowering the detailer to pick the product that's going to get it done right the first time, or doesn't have the customer coming back, about a week later going, hey, I noticed swirls.
Yeah, exactly. That's custom. It's interesting, when we surveyed a lot of these shops and went into them, 80 to 90% had wool. And that surprised me.
Yeah, I think there's a comfort factor there. I think if you look at the age population of technicians and paint finishers and detailers and painters in general, It's a comfort factor for me. That's what I used, and I know that, and I'm confident. And so, we've had several products come through here over the couple of years for testing, and I'll test it. And I can't count the times that I've tested a product, not liked it, and my jerk reaction is to go get my wool pad and I got to start over in the car, because we do that on a lot of rental cars. We do our testing on rental cars, and I can't really send it back to them. The way I want, even though I do buy the waiver before we do product testing. But it's comfort factor.
Right.
I think technicians, Jason, would you agree? We're just creatures of habit.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's what it is for everything. You grow up doing something, and that's what you use. I still got my JG 502 at the red anytime. So
yeah. So a couple of questions. What do you think about using a rotary buffing and using a rotary for buffing and using your orbital for finish polishing? Is that a good combo for a technician?
Absolutely. Some of those shops we actually ran into that.
Yeah. And then for if I had a brand new detailer coming into my shop, would you recommend starting them on the foam pad versus the wool? I mean, I guess give the guy the 22 shoot before you give him the Desert Eagle.
Oh my gosh, you're in my head. Yeah, give him the wool, baby steps.
Yeah.
I believe that you can get yourself in trouble, especially with a new person, new technician, with with foam versus wool. It's a little bit forgiving, even though wool's more aggressive and you get it on an edge, it's gonna rip the paint off. But if you can teach them to buff off that panel, I would rather start them with wool and then work into the foam.
Okay. That's interesting. That's a nice kind of, I guess, a flip there than where even I think my head was going. I think I was thinking the wool would be a little too much damage. So always find that total lost car and drag them in and go buff that hood before they tow it away. So when you do have the new people, make sure they're not polishing customer cars to start with. I can't tell you all the experimenting we did with total losses that were at the shop before they were towed away, for tear down and all kinds of things.
Another thing that working with new folks is a 3/4 inch tape on the edge of wherever you're working with, let's say a hood. You sand and then you pull the tape, and it just keeps them off that edge. It's a visual reminder to keep them off. Just as a training tool, right?
Yeah, that's a good thing to do. I got these new magnetic strips in now. So I've got, we used to, tape off the edges of panels. They now have these little plastic strips with magnets in them. And so you can protect panel edges with a little bit more rigidity than tape. But that's a fantastic tool there to do as well. I know you touched on it briefly, but it always comes up. Tips for black cars, those deep dark colors, those blacks. If you'll just run through, because it's always top of mind, everybody's question, run through that again. Just what are your tips for those dark colored cars?
It's a great question. And I do get asked it a lot. Like, how do you deal with this? It's so annoying. I've got a veteran person working on this car, puts it outside, and there's swirls on it. If it starts from the beginning, make sure it's cool. Well, that's a challenge, right? We're coming in the summer. Try to get it, put a hose on it without fresh paint. Just put a hose on it, get it cooled down, sand it, right? Sand it as fine as you can get. 2000 is a good place to be, and make sure that you've refined all those 1500 grit scratches. All right, that's going to help not overheating the car. Then get in with your compound again, wool or foam. Like Fords or Jeeps, whatever, and work the 2 foot by 2 foot area, and then verify it with a light before you move on, right? So we don't keep over processing. Then move on to the next area. Then we do our black pad with the compound. Again, making sure the 2 foot by 2 foot area, hit it with a light, a very bright light, and then do the polishing with the blue pad, and that's when you're really going to eye it real good. And I keep hitting the lights because the lights are going to expose the swirls. They're
Right.
just going to. They're going to give. We learned that, you know, when we in the lab, that when we tested the light over top of it and then we took it outside, I had the same. It was the same. There wasn't any surprise swirls, because that's the worst part of it, right? You get it done, you take it outside, and your heart goes into your stomach because you got to do this again.
Right. And I think when we go back and been looking at it, that sandpaper, you know, that cutting before you hit to the compound is either going to make you or break you. So you got to keep that sandpaper clean. You don't want to sand in more scratches than you're taking out. And then don't take too many big jumps. And I see, you know, for a lot of shop owners, that when you get into that grit of paper, it gets expensive. I mean, that's, you know, that's expensive paper. And so sometimes we jump too far and we're not refining out those scratches. And then we try to refine them out with compound, and we just keep compounding the problem.
Yeah. Well, we end up chasing it, right? Oh, I can get this. You know, we removed the dirt nib, and it gouged into the black car, let's say.
Yeah.
And now we're trying to get it out with a foam pad. Now we grab the wool. We're chasing it. To your point.
Yeah.
Get it done
Putting more in there before he goes. So when it comes to sanding before compounding, what's your personal preference, wet versus dry?
I personally like 3-inch 2000 grit wet. It cuts like 1200 and finishes like 3000 in one step. I like that.
Yeah.
And it gets any debris, it's floating it, and you're not dragging it. If it's possible to keep it small, right? Not the Switzerland answer again, but if it's a whole hood, I'm going to grab a 6-inch 1500 grit, go to town on it, finish it with 2000 grit wet, and then finish.
Yeah. And then
Depends what I got.
Yeah, there's a difference between, I think, what we, you know, traditionally when I was a kid, wet sanding and having your feet soaking and having a bucket and a hose and all that. There's a difference now between, you know, I may do 1500 dry, and then my next step up may be mist, and then I'm making a slurry more than I'm making a true traditional wet sand. And I like that slurry because I think you pinned it right. It's like the paper kind of floats, and while the paper's floating, that debris is floating. And so I'm not putting in more pigtails that I'm trying to take out. So
right. It depends what I have. If I have a couple nibs, I'm grabbing the 2000 and going. I'm done. 2000 grit, sand it, and I'm moving on. I'm ready to polish.
Yeah. Now I can tell you, in the summertime, I didn't mind being the one that had to stand there with the garden hose. And
bringing flashbacks to me. That's what I had to do.
Yeah, I got on swim trunks and flip flops and wet sanding that day, so that wasn't too bad. And so, do you find a cordless buffer is less intimidating to an entry level tech, or do you find that it's also lighter weight for a person of slight build? The lighter weight issue, as I've gotten older, I do prefer the battery because it's here is way easier on me.
Right.
My personal preference. But do you have any training experience on what people feel more comfortable with?
Yes. So locally, we invite the local high schools in the Votex, and there's a local college here too, and so they're new to it, and I put it in their hand, a little bit of instruction, and they're very comfortable in the way we go.
Yeah, I think it would be less intimidating too. I think that's a good I guess it's not an analogy. What's the word I'm looking for? Good catch. Good interpretation of that. So, well, Dennis, thanks for joining us. That's a lot of good information. It's one of those things where I think the customer doesn't understand what we do when it comes to the welding and the intricacies of the repair, but they definitely notice the finish of the vehicle, that paint match, you know, how well it shines, how smooth it feels. And that all comes down to our detailer, or we always call the detailer the smartest guy in the shop. He's the one that turns around and goes, "Hey, why is this light on?" But he's, you know, but definitely something in the shop to pay attention to. So I appreciate your time today. Now you're back with us later See, Jason, did you memorize the schedule yet?
Yeah, it's, he's back with us on we got ours come back
Friday,
with
right?
corrosion protection on Friday.
All right. So Friday we're
Yeah,
talking
Dennis
about
is
the
that one.
the wonders of cavity wax. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So every technician at least one can a week. So I can't wait to have
Yes.
my cavity wax discussion. So if you do have any questions about buffing, the pads, the products, anything, well, you can always just send your questions to, we've got that up there showing on the screen, rsg@saint-gobain.com. And they'll traffic all that stuff to Dennis and the team, and they'll get back to you. So anything that you need to know. And then Dennis, we will see you Friday.
Good.
Stay healthy.
Always.
And I guess, let us know whenever you finally decide to, break the ice out there and start practicing the swimming for those triathlons. When's your next triathlon?
July 26th.
Okay.
Ironman Lake Placid.
Okay. All right. Well, we gotta
Hope
get.
it happens.
Yeah, let's hope it happens. Right. Exactly. So, all right. Well, we will see everyone. Again, we will be back this afternoon at 3:00 with Cam Otto talking about glue pulling techniques and practices for collision repair. So that'll be a good one as well. And we will see everyone then. Thank you.
Thank you.